I'm describing to you the reasons why we have not chosen to use that label, because it doesn't seem to accurately describe what had happened. We also don't want to be in a situation where we are legitimizing what we consider to be a completely illegitimate justification for this violence.
The Obama administration has made what they believe is the right call for America and the rest of the world in their role as a global leader. In the opinion of the president and his advisors, we must refrain from using the term radical Islam because it is not accurate, and using such phrases would only legitimize their claim to being part of the religion. This, as a new poll is released showing a wide part of the Muslim world not only believes in the radical side of their faith, but also calls for it to be the guiding principle in how the future earth is shaped to fit their beliefs. Let us seek out some truth, ask some hard questions here. Welcome to MidPoint, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, one who has advocated for the separation of mosque and state and spoken against the ideology of political Islam. Zuhdi Jasser joins us. Zuhdi, thanks so much for being here again.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me back.
Zuhdi, I'm going to get right to that word, the terms rather, radical Islam. The president and his advisors believe it is not accurate. Is it?
Absolutely. And how do they expect us to have a seat at the table as reformists who love our faith if we are marginalized by the Islamists that are advising the president, who tell him, oh, don't mention it because then it empowers the radicals? Well, this is just a one-off problem. We see not only a pattern of terror, but the militants that attacked this magazine in Paris are inspired by no other than the leaders of the Saudi regime, the Iranian regime. I mean, this week you have a blogger who's being whipped for blasphemy, who runs an organization just like mine called Free Saudi Liberals, was basically saying that the Saudi leadership cannot speak for Islam. Muslims have a right to speak on their own behalf. He was called an apostate, called a blasphemer, and is being whipped in a public square in front of a mosque by the Saudi government. And he may die from those whippings. So that's no different than the radicals in Paris. So what the administration doesn't want is they don't have the courage or the spine to confront regimes like the Saudis or the Iranians in their interpretation of Islam, in their Islamic state. So rather than empower reformists on the ground, what they're doing is making our country, a bastion of freedom, appear hypocritical in that we don't want to advance these principles and protect the liberals on the ground in Saudi and the ground in Iran and their green revolution. And instead we want to step back and let the Islamist radicals actually guide the narrative of who speaks for Islam.
Okay, Zuhdi, hold on one sec, because we only got a couple of minutes here before we take a break. But you just focused on something. You talked about Saudi Arabia. Hang on. There are some people out there who would say, wait a minute, come on. The Saudis are not nearly as bad as what happens in Iran, in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan by ISIS. Stop going after the Saudis, because in reality, they're really good people who don't believe in a lot of this. This goes on without their knowledge. I know you've heard those things. We hear them all the time. What's the truth?
The truth is, look at what's guiding what they do. They do not allow any dissent. They have a complete suffocation of any freedom of expression, whether it be on Twitter, websites. This man, Raif Badawi, is a perfect example. There's other bloggers who have also been attacked and persecuted, and their jails of Saudi Arabia are filled. There's one version of Islam, which is the Wahhabi version, that dominates their Sharia court system. And if you look at the textbooks and Quranic interpretations throughout the schools of the world, Muslim schools and mosques, Jim Woolsey has said it, there's a $90 billion project to destroy the free thought of Islam coming out of the Saudi regime. And it's no different. The only difference between Iran and Saudi Arabia is Saudis are the Sunni version of radical Islam and the Iranians are the Shiite version.
Are the Saudis, and perhaps in your opinion, the best at being sneaky extremists?
And the reason they are the best at it is they portray themselves as victims of Al-Qaeda, and these are basically monsters that they create and they come back to bite them in the rear. So they are then claiming to be our allies because of petrodollars and other aspects of economic issues that we try to keep our gas prices low. In the meantime, they're spreading ideology that's anti-American, viciously anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, and they are not our allies.
10 seconds before we take a break here. Answer from you. Do the extremists, in your opinion, really care one whit what President Obama says or doesn't say and his ideology and his terminology?
not only don't they care, it empowers them when he doesn't stand up for our values of freedom, and that's why we see more acts of terror happening around the world.
There indeed is that other side of the story. Zuhdi, please hang on. Back after the break, we're going to dive deeper into the just released numbers on Sharia law and what these numbers reveal about interpretations of the Quran and what it must send as warnings to the West. Believe me, these numbers are frightening, and they're up next here on MidPoint. Welcome back to MidPoint. Formerly a member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Zuhdi Jasser. Zuhdi, these numbers actually caught me off guard when I saw them, and I would bet that a lot of people would say the same. This is a Pew Research Center poll that was just done. It was talking about the countries around the world who support Sharia law as the official law. And here we just have the top 5. Afghanistan and Iraq, both over 90%. Of course, we expected that, but Pakistan, 89%, Malaysia and Niger, 86%, Pakistan, again, not just the territories, but the country itself, 84%. The numbers show that there is a preponderance of countries in the Middle East where the people who were talked to there believe that Sharia law is the law of the land. Are we absolutely, with these numbers coming out? First of all, let me ask you, do you believe the numbers and believe that most of the extremist Muslim world, or that maybe even some who are not extremists, believe that Sharia law is the way to the future?
Well, this is such an important issue, and let me first just mention I'm still on the Commission of Religious Freedom, but my comments are my own. And I will tell you that this is so important because this is the narrative, that the battle that's happening within all of these Muslim majority countries. And Sharia to a Muslim means God's law. So ultimately, the enemy is the enemy of the theocrats, if you will, theocracy, or the Islamic State. So Muslims right now have been torn between two sides of the same coin of fascism. One side is they view secularism or non-Islamic law as dictatorship, military authoritarian rule from the monarch or from a military dictator. The other side, they say, oh, must be the only option, which is theocracy. So I believe those numbers because they haven't had that third option of liberty that ultimately reformed the West, created the American Revolution and all the revolutions of Europe that displaced theocracy. So until we get our heads around the fact that Muslims are choosing Sharia by vast majorities because they view secularism as dictatorship, and until they get to their head around and their arms around liberty and freedom, which is what they tried to do in the Arab awakening, they're still going to continue to choose Sharia.
But Zuhdi, let me ask you this, because you mentioned the word liberty in there. We are told time and time again by experts, liberty's not the answer. It's the fact that we have disenfranchised young men and women who don't have jobs, don't see a future there. It's not a matter of being free. It's a matter of they have no place to make money, spend money, and create a career. Isn't that more closer to the truth?
Oh my, please stop listening to those experts. That is nonsense. Al-Qaeda, the monarchs, the fascists of the Middle East are all educated and make a ton of money, billions of dollars. They come to the West.
But we're talking about the people down underneath. We're talking about the rank and file, if you will.
But even those, it's not related to, certainly education is a major problem, but economics allows independence if it's true free markets. But ultimately, if you want to reform, you need a laboratory to reform that in. That laboratory has to happen where there's free exchange of ideas. There's a sense of equality, which is true equality, not related to certain faith demographics, racial demographics. It has to be based in true liberty. While, for example, leaders like El-Sisi may be better than other dictators because he's talking about reform against violence, etc., but ultimately, to inspire true democratic change, you need institutions that are based in critical thinking. And right now, there's very few institutions that are surviving in Muslim majority countries that really foster critical thinking. And that's the only way liberty will become an option for those populations.
Well, Zuhdi, that's a great idea. But then you're talking about something that we again are told will take decades to do. We're dealing with assassinations and killings right now and people who want to enact Sharia law tomorrow. So let's not look 20, 30 years down the road. About a minute or so that I have left here. What do we do now?
Two things. First of all, remember the Cold War we thought was going to take decades. We'd never defeat the Soviets, and finally we got our heads around it in the 60s, and by 89 the wall went down and we were winning that without firing a bullet against the Soviets. Secondly, the Egyptian Muslims defeated the Brotherhood ideologically in 1 year, and you had millions of Egyptians in the largest demonstrations in history rise up against the theocrats and against, in Revolution 1.0, against the military.
Then what are they
Now,
doing that we can learn from?
well, they're beginning to develop civil society. In Estonia and other Eastern Bloc countries, we helped them develop democracy after the Soviets pulled out. Same thing in Egypt. We can, instead of just dumping money for food and other things that we have no connection to, start to help them use that money that we give them to, not for military growth, but for civil society, for institutions that develop liberty and help them develop political parties that are not Islamic.
But you're not talking about nation building here, are you?
No, civil society building. We used to have a U.S. information agency that was doing things like Radio Free Europe and others. Right now, we're completely out of the game. Those vacuums are being filled by the Al Jazeeras, the Russias, the Chinese, the Iranians are putting in propaganda to promote Islamism and the Islamic State concept rather than liberty, because we in the West are completely out of the mix of ideas that are beginning to transform those societies.
We're going to pound away until people keep listening. Zuhdi Jasser, always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. Thanks so much. We'll do it again.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right, break, and we return with another fact most Americans don't want to face. And now we must separate paranoia from fact in the war on terror here on American soil.